It's a long chapter, and that's why I'm only reading one. Hello, and welcome to Ralph Reads, brought to you by TURN, the United Ronin Networks. My name is Ralph Anthony Garcia, also known as R4, the legal, the loyal, the regal, the royal, Ronin Ralph, your master of ceremonies. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Today on Ralph Reads, we ride with the guy with the tour guide on his side, Midnight and the Meaning of Love, written by the one and only, the woman, the myth, proud and loud enough to wake a rough crowd, Sister Souljah. This is Book 2, the 5th go-round. Let us all watch it unfold and go down with the one who seeks his recompense. Let the reading commence. Chapter 9. Three hours passed in 30 minutes, it seemed.
Next stop, Kyoto,
The soft voice announced in Japanese and in English. When I looked up and through my window, the images that we were now moving past were not what I imagined they would be. As the train slowed to a halt, my first impression was that Kyoto was a place of dull metals and grayness. I was certain, however, that it would get better. It would become comparable to my wife and suitable to her artistic eyes. It had to. When I stepped off at Kyoto Station, it was almost noon. I threw my backpack and belongings into 2 secure lockers, dropped in the coins, and searched for a phone. Chiesa answered with a sleepy voice. "Wake up, you're on the payroll," was my greeting.
you sound excited.
She said.
You got there safely, I see.
What did you expect? You got all the info?
About 1 hour more and I'll have it all completed.
She said, making her voice sound more alert.
I know it's just about the data, but her diary is really emotional, and it pulled me into a secret world that was amazing and unfamiliar. I felt myself.
She paused, then never finished her sentence. I filled the silence with my new requests. "I got a couple more things for you to look into,"
Tell me.
she said sweetly, like any request was no problem for her. "Go to the bookstore and look up an author named Shiori Nakamura and buy all the books," I said.
All of them?
She repeated. "Yeah, and while you're there, check out one more author. He's an American." I flipped the softcover biography around. "His name is Seth Arrington,"
Got it.
she said.
Stay out the direct sunlight, 'cause it's hotter down there in the south where you are. Call me later. I'll have everything ready.
I hung up. Walking through and out of Kyoto Station was like a stroll through Pastry Lane. There was a glut of bakeries displaying cakes decorated with fresh fruit slices, all assembled in intricate designs. Some of the Japanese fruits I couldn't recognize. There were also shops with only fresh-baked cookies and some with fresh-baked breads. The smell of maple syrup seeped into the air had led to a couple of waffle stands. Lines were forming and customers were dipping fresh-baked small waffle slices into the syrup. I kept it moving. Kyoto Women's College, I said to the bus attendant in the booth. He gave me the bus number using only his fingers. There was not an airport limousine quote-unquote experience. It was smaller, and the seats were positioned in an arrangement different than I had ever seen on public transportation. It was clean and organized. The driver was polite without words. I dropped my exact change in and tried not to stand out as the tallest, only black African man or person on board, or in sight, or even visible, walking on the streets. The people didn't stare. Most of them didn't even look, glance, or peek. It was almost like I was invisible. The elders sat up front. The middle-aged adults sat and stood in the middle. The teens and college kids sat and stood in the raised section where the seats were up a few steps and raised up high. The ride was completely silent. The Kyoto kids were more laid back than the Tokyo cliques. There was no Harajuku crew sporting strange costumes, nor were there any high-fashion types or naked females or freaks. Some passengers were reading. Others were nodding or sleeping. School kids were studying. The vibe was calm and ordinary. The names of the upcoming bus stops were displayed on a digital screen in Japanese and then in English. After a minute, the scenery shifted and rows of beautiful trees and flowers and plants began to emerge. The town seemed old and special. Most of the shops were small and made of wood. I stood looking through the bus windows, especially when the bus would stop and lose some passengers as well as pick others up. My stop was coming up. As I got off, surprisingly, most of the passengers unloaded with me. Now we were all facing what turned out to be a temple. Many of the elderly people entered. I was still at first. I had never seen a real temple in person before. It was wide and mysterious. The architecture was attractive and appeared ancient. I could smell incense burning, yet the place was designed so that you really had to go inside to discover whatever they had happening. You could not tell from the outside what the experience would be like. I was definitely curious, but I let it go and turned 60 degrees instead. The street sign read Shichi Johodori. It was not the easiest to remember, but I would remember. Now I was facing what seemed like a long museum situated across the street. It extended over and down a few blocks. When I turned directly to my right, I could see the sign for Kyoto's Women's College and the arrow pointed uphill. I began walking in that direction. The college was on a street named Higashiya Maschichiyo. What the f***? Oddly, Akemi's high school was on the same campus with the college. I had learned that from the MoMA pamphlet and checked it out on my map of Kyoto. I planned to go to her high school and sit outside until the bell rang and classes were dismissed for the day. Then I would just wait and see if she simply came walking out. Once I crossed the street, I looked toward the sky. It was so bright, the white so intense, the blue so clear, the sun so orange that none of it could be taken on directly. The power of that sky pushed back and forced all eyes to bend and turn away. As I began climbing the hills, which were framed by mountains piled up way off in the distance, I had to smile at this scene. A succession of hills being climbed up and down by females of varied ages, dressed mostly in miniskirts and matching school uniforms. Only a handful rocking individual style in clothing. Hundreds of female students all on an incline, beginning with toddlers in short pants and pressed shirts, all 50 of them with the same short hair, wearing yellow hats, being led on a walk by 2 female teachers in front and 2 female teachers in the rear, all carrying raised umbrellas where there was not even a drop of rain. There were slightly older schoolgirls playing in an enclosed yard. There were junior high school girls shielded behind a black iron gate, each plank crafted like a spear, sharpened on top and pointing toward the sky. You could see in, they could see out, but you could not get into where they were. Further uphill, there was the Kyoto Girls' High School with the locked entrance and elaborate intercom system with steel buttons, a steel box, and steel speakers. Immediately across from it was the Kyoto Women's College, all its entrances flung open. Girls 17, 18, and 19 pouring in and out, dressed how they wanted to do it seemed. I had reached the top. So far, I had not run into any police, but now I could see the security booths situated in front of the high school, but behind their gate and off to the side. The same kind of security booth was at the opened entrance of the college as well. They were little brick stations in the shape of an octagon, with uniformed elderly men stationed inside. The only other men I saw moving in the midst of the girls were working men driving trucks, making deliveries, doing gardening and ground maintenance, as well as driving the campus shuttle. Other than that, it was girls, girls, girls. There was a sitting place made of huge black rocks right between the high school and the college. I headed over and leaned there, watching and waiting. A few young Japanese work guys in wide-legged pants with drawstring waists, t-shirts on top, and heads wrapped in a white towel or in a bandana sat at the top of the rocks, some reading manga, smoking cigarettes one after the other, and watching girls go by. Lunch break at one of the 25 businesses that ran up on one side of the hills. On the other side was where the girls' school, buildings, fields, and gates stood. Lucky sisters, I thought to myself. Could I imagine 5 or 10 Brooklyn dudes from my block working in a world of only girls with big feline eyes and hiked up skirts and bare legs? The old 60 and 70-year-old uniformed security guards seemed in good shape, but standing in their brick booths, they would represent no threat at all. Brooklyn would run through, snatching up everything. Nakamura had it all figured out, he thought, raising a talented, intelligent, beautiful, and rich daughter in an almost exclusively female environment. Being a member of the college board, as it said in the MoMA pamphlet, he probably intended for Akemi to graduate from the all-girls Kyoto High School and walk 20 feet away into the all-girls Kyoto Women's College. Believe me, I understood, and I understand. We sent Naja to an all-girls Islamic school for the past 3 years, and she was only 7 now. And I intend, and have always intended, for her to remain in an all-Islamic school of girls until she either graduated or married. Nakamura's mistake, I reflected, was allowing his teenage daughter to travel alone 7,000 miles to New York City. He must have felt confident because he had 2 or 3 stepbrothers living there, and he was even more confident because he had raised her right, quote-unquote. I plan and we plan and they plan was all I could think to say to myself, but Allah is the best of all planners. It seemed that Allah brought Akemi and me together, perhaps for his own reasons, which no human has the means to know. I had written to Nakamura of my intention, desire, and plan to marry his daughter. I included the documents required since we were young and parental signatures were necessary. He signed the documents and impressed his seal confirming it. I married Akemi after she handed those documents to me. Those signed documents and the life of Akemi Nakamura went from his hand to mine. Now he wanted to dishonor me with a take-back. But marriage cannot be taken back. And my ninyo and sealer could never be erased. By 3 o'clock, hundreds of females poured down from the hilltops and flowed in a thick and steady wave passing me by. I must have looked like a fool, my eyes searching through and into and beside and beyond what appeared now to be thousands of girls with black hair and Japanese eyes and legs made shapely from walking and climbing all these hills daily. I did not see my wife. I wasn't 100% sure that I had not missed her, though perhaps looking right when she went left or straight by the time she was already moving behind me. But if she had been part of this massive crowd, she would have seen me, right? I asked myself. Then there was a possibility that she was not one of the walkers. Perhaps she was in one of the private red luxury line buses, labeled Princess Line. Herds of females boarded the bright, sparkling vehicles lined one after the other. 7 strong, moving slowly down the hills and off the campus. My eyes scanned each window as the buses inched by. But my wife was not there either. I had an hour and a half before I needed to head to a spot oddly named Tamisa New York Style Yoga. There were 2 places that Akemi had identified as relaxing places that she went when she was feeling real emotional. Akemi had written that the Japanese don't like to burden one another with their emotions. To express them is considered selfish as well as a personal weakness. Akemi wrote that she found it difficult to restrain her emotions, so she separated herself when she felt them coming on strong. She would go to a special area of Kyoto, Arashiyama, and walk alone there, or to yoga class to release and soothe her soul. Chiesa had told me this afternoon, my morning prayer, and during our breakfast before sunrise. In fact, Chiesa wanted to give me detailed descriptions of Akemi's written thoughts and words and feelings. But over breakfast of orange slices, boiled eggs, and soup, I told Chiesa that all I wanted was the list of names and addresses of my wife's friends and family members. The truth is, I didn't want to invade my wife's private thoughts, feelings, and writings. If I could use the names, addresses, and telephone numbers that Akemi mentioned in her diary to locate her, she could express all her emotions and thoughts directly to me in her own way. Moving downhill, when I eased off the campus completely, I found myself facing what looked like an art gallery. As I walked all the way around the building to the entrance, I discovered that it was a 3-story hotel. In fact, it was a Hyatt hotel, an American brand. As I looked around, I thought, American-owned, Japanese style. Before approaching the uniformed women who were stationed outside the main lobby, I put on my sunglasses. The women were petite and dressed similarly to Japanese flight attendants and customs workers. They wore tight blue skirts with matching jackets and pretty silk scarves around their necks. They wore standard business pumps on their feet, not too cheap, not too stylish. They stood welcoming customers and signaling taxis. "Konnichiwa," I greeted them.
Checking in?
One of the ladies asked in English. "Maybe," I responded.
All inquiries at the front desk.
She pointed aside. I walked in to one of the 5 desk clerks.
Reservation?
The suited Japanese man asked me, getting right to it. "Not yet." "What's the nightly rate?" I asked.
You need a reservation?
"Okay. What's the rate?" I asked again.
We are completely booked,
he said, his voice soft, unlike a man's, and his manner polite, but somehow I still felt like he was insulting me. "No problem," I told him. I turned and crossed the spacious lobby floor where people sat silently on plush, fashionable furniture. The ceilings were high and decorated by intricate woodwork instead of paint. Pansy flowers were arranged in clay vases throughout the lobby. A dining room area was open and framed by a wall of windows from floor to ceiling. Diners could see the display of nature, a rock garden and flowing fountain while enjoying a meal. I could tell it was too expensive to stay here, not like the short list of Kyoto hostels I held in my pocket. As I approached the concierge station, I organized my inquiry so I wouldn't seem suspicious. I needed to find a way of asking, where is the rich area of Kyoto located? I didn't have an address for Akemi's home, but I was sure she lived in the wealthiest neighborhood. I reminded myself that even though the Hyatt had an all-Japanese staff, it was an American hotel, and everyone would be required to speak English comfortably. "Konnichiwa," I said, laying my American passport on the concierge's counter.
Konnichiwa. May I help you?
She asked softly, with an eager smile. Yes. I removed my sunglasses to place her at ease. "I would like to visit the best neighborhoods in Kyoto. Can you help me with that?" I asked her.
Yes, of course.
She agreed rapidly.
What are you most interested in? Temples, nature, architecture, museums, foods, fabrics, or would you like to visit the traditional area of the geisha and Maiko?
"Architecture," I said smoothly. "I like to tour the best-built homes and neighborhoods." She walked from behind the counter to a pamphlet stand. I followed. She reached in and pulled out a map. She handed one to me and returned to her station. With a red pen, she checked the most interesting, traditional, and upscale neighborhoods, and even offered the exact public bus information after I declined joining the private group tours that they had leaving from the hotel the following morning. Then she added,
I think, however, that the most wonderful homes are hidden in the mountains. The nature that surrounds those places makes them the most beautiful.
Are those areas open to the public? I questioned.
Of course you can travel up to the mountain. We have tons of tours of selected mountain areas, but you cannot tour the private homes in the same way that you would tour the sacred temples. We have a cable car that will also carry you over the mountains, and the view is most lovely.
What about these mountains that sit directly behind the college? I pointed.
Which ones?
She asked.
Each of them is different.
Voluntarily, she came from around her counter and led me on the walk outside the hotel lobby.
Those are called the Heisen Mountains. You can tour them. The other one next to it is privately owned.
Privately owned? I repeated incredulously. Someone can own a mountain in Japan? I asked, genuinely shocked at the idea.
Yes.
She laughed a bit.
Not often, but it does happen. In this case, it's a very famous Japanese actor who owns that one. He is retired now and having insaye.
What is that? I followed up. She smiled.
Well, in Japanese, it means secret life. It happens when a powerful person retires early because of great success in his business, but continues controlling and even managing events quietly and from afar, unknown to most.
She placed a finger over her lips. I thought to myself, Japanese people seem to love the words hide, hidden, secret, invisible, and apparently they also loved secret lifestyles.
Well, you can't visit his mountain or the one beside it. That one there,
She pointed.
is owned by Naoko Nakamura.
Then her words trailed off, and I could no longer hear them. At 4:45 p.m., I sat in a small, smoky cafe in the corner by the window where I could lean up and watch or lean back and be shielded by the wall. It was next door to the Tamisa, New York-style yoga dojo. I waited for my wife to appear, believing that if she found peace and ease and comfort here, she surely would show up. I watched for expensive cars pulling up and for limos. I imagined that she might be driven by a driver who was instructed to deliver her to the front door of the yoga dojo and to pick her up immediately afterward. Or she might be casually accompanied by a, quote, friend, unquote, who will report back to her father the same way Pink Pumps or Iowa Akita did. Akemi had been stripped of her marriage, money, and mobility by a mogul who owned a mountain, and only Allah knows what else. Empty-handed, after clocking arriving cars and all yoga student faces and waiting for an hour, even after students stopped arriving, I left. I grabbed a taxi and said one word to the driver, Arashiyama. I knew it was a long shot, but maybe not. I had no idea where I was going or where I should look. Yet, I didn't like the idea of my wife strolling around, possibly alone, in some public place, looking for peace and privacy and filled with heavy emotions. The beautiful waterfall in Arashiyama reminded me of Akemi. As I stepped out of the taxi at the edge of a river, I understood why she would come here for peace. She was like the river, and ever since I'd met her, there had been water beneath my feet. The Arashiyama area was on the water, with wide open spaces, nature, mountains, and sky. It was not crowded. In fact, it seemed that as I arrived, many groups were leaving on tour buses. Surprisingly, there were not foreign visitors from America and Europe or Africa or Australia. There were Japanese people touring their own sights and land. Seated at the side of the river, watching the waterfall, were local people, mothers and daughters and sons, patiently playing, picnicking, and admiring. A few fathers were off strolling on the boardwalk. The mothers had the comfort of locals as their 1 and 2 years young wandered toward and close to the edge of the water playfully, unafraid, as only people familiar with a place could be. I could see their small houses nestled at riverside. They were the kinds of houses that people blessed with awesome surroundings could be happy living in because their real home was outdoors, just like in my southern Sudanese grandfather's village. Some women wore yukatas, the summer version of the kimono. The colors were striking, and the wide sleeves stylish and sensual. Their faces were natural, though, which was pretty to me. There wasn't a trace of that white powder that I had seen smeared all over the faces in drawings of the traditional geisha. I thought that white geisha makeup and those drawn-on little red lips were the definition of ugly. The sun was no longer at full power, yet it still spread light. I knew it would set a half an hour or more after the early sunset times in Tokyo just by looking at its current position in the sky. I was cool with that. I had to erase the sunset and get a look around. I crossed over a small footbridge which led to a series of craft shops. They were for tourists, I figured, so I kept going. I reached a small inlet where a man sat silently on a modest, narrow boat. 1 or 2 pushes of his paddle and he would be thrust out into the body of the main river. Soon I reached a wooded area, although I could still hear the water gushing and pushing and streaming. I was drawn to a series of stairs that seemed to create a path through and up into the woods. Yet the stairs went on forever, as though when you reached the top, you could even touch a cloud. No one was around. I thought maybe my wife would go where no one else was going. I thought she might be in those woods with her easel and brushes and pencils and paints, so I went. The wide cement stairs were not a straight walk up. Every 20 or so steps, the stairs would switch direction, as though they were placed by someone with a wicked sense of humor. I climbed. Suddenly, the wide cement stairs narrowed, and soon there were only stairs made of logs. Even though I was climbing high towards the sky, there were no protective barriers to keep a walker from falling down below. Soon the set of narrow wooden stairs turned to stairs made from mud and stones. As I advanced, I was still surrounded by beautiful trees of every color as though it were autumn, not spring. There was a breeze within the woods. As I peered between plants and branches and trees, I didn't see her or anyone else for that matter. There were directional signs, but they were all written in kanji. There were a few wooden stands lodged into the soil pamphlet dispensers. I assumed that normally they would offer a map of this specific area for the lost or translations for foreigners, but there were no more pamphlets left anywhere. After climbing 40 sets of stairs with 20 steps a set, on the 800th stair, I reached the pavilion of a small mountain. As I looked around, happy to see a clearing, there was no one up there except me and about 30 medium-sized monkeys. Instantly, I threw my hands up to guard my face, recalling how baboons would swing down suddenly and attack uninvited guests for play. But these weren't baboons, and they didn't attack. In fact, they glanced at me like, "What the f*** are you looking at?" I smiled and withdrew my guard. They were tan, long-haired monkeys with red faces and funny fingers. They had mouth pockets where they were obviously storing food for themselves and their little ones. As I checked out their details, I could distinguish the males from the females. The male ones had 2 long and sharp canine teeth. Some of the mothers lay flat on their backs with the little ones arranged on their bellies. Some were swinging, some picking insects out of the next one's coat, some eating, some just chilling and grabbing and pulling and playing with their groins. A group of them were dropping shit from their red-colored sad like chestnuts. As I looked back, I could see now how there were monkeys in trees that I had already walked past. If this had been the ghetto, I would have gotten got. I just had not seen them camouflaged there. Brown fur on brown branches. Still, I knew there was no excuse for my oversight. Although I felt slack for missing them, I respected them damn monkeys for being so easy that they could actually go undetected by the unpredictable predator, the human. I walked toward the edge and looked down over Kyoto. It was amazing to see the town from the sky down. A kaleidoscope of treetops and hundreds of houses and rooftops, not situated on flat land, but riddled through the hills and hidden in the valleys and surrounding the waters, all different shapes and sizes and colors. Amazed, I took a deep breath, then turned my face toward the bluing sky. Akemi, where are you? It took me 3/4 less time to get down those steps than it did to climb up. I rushed across the same footbridge that brought me over and asked the vendor, "Do you have a map of Arashiyama?" After answering my evening greeting, he answered one word, "Closed." Then he pulled out a worn map of Arashiyama from his own pocket.
"You are here,"
he said in a way that let me know he didn't know many other English words to use. He circled the location where he and I were both standing, although it had been circled a few times already, and said, "Monkey Park." I had to laugh at myself. I had been searching for my wife unknowingly in a monkey forest. I made my prayer by the water at dusk. Before I closed my eyes, the sky was light gray. The sun was orange. The moon was white. When I opened my eyes, the sky was black. The sun had escaped. The moon was yellow. Using my new phone card, I called Chiesa to check her. Instead of my on-point sentinel, my lucky charm, the one who had my wife's diary and all the information completed by now, I reached a recording.
Ryoshi, wait for me. I'm coming. Meet me at the station at 7 p.m. Don't eat without me,
she said in English, and then her voicemail began speaking in Japanese, I presume for all other callers. I put the phone down. I should have known that Chiesa would follow me even though I told her to remain in Tokyo. I had thought about it, in fact. I had thought that the 300 round-trip bullet train ticket, Tokyo to Kyoto, would separate her from her enthusiasm and determination, but it didn't. As I moved toward the station at 7:15 p.m., already past her meet-up time, I speculated on what she had told her grandfather for him to allow her to travel here. Or if she had spoken with her own father on the phone before leaving Tokyo, and how much she had explained to him. Or had she kept every detail a secret, like I preferred her to do? Also, where would she sleep when I didn't even choose a place to stay for myself? And what was her reason for coming? Black Birkenstocks, black cargo pants, and a tight black tee. She had her pretty silver eyes outlined in black eyeliner, and something else on her was also switched, but I broke my stare. On her back, she carried a purple backpack stuffed with 2 weeks' worth of items, it seemed. Her sterling silver belt buckle was embossed with 2 clashing swords, modeled after the patch I got from Yuka. She smiled as soon as she saw me. I smiled too. "What's happening?" I asked her, my curiosity very elevated.
Did you eat?
She asked. "Not yet."
Good, let's go,
she said, bumping me with her elbow. "Let me take that from you," I said, with my hand already on one of her backpack straps.
Where's your backpack?
She asked. "Here in the locker. I didn't get a room yet," I told her.
We got a room. I have a lot to report to you,
she said with serious excitement. Everything moved 10 times faster with Chiesa here. We picked up my backpack and jumped on the bus to what she said was the Kyoto downtown area. Rocking 2 backpacks, one on my back, the other in my hand, we pressed ourselves further into the packed bus. The night breeze was warm, a rush of heated air massaging our faces. We walked among medium-sized continuous crowds on the main strip of shops of every imaginable kind. Some boasted 500,000 yen silk kimonos that could not have been more perfect unless designed by my Uma. There were stores exclusively selling wooden shoes of every style. There were restaurants of sushi and sashimi, yakitori and other takoyaki, sake bars, tea houses, and even burger joints. Most canopies, awnings, were written in kanji. I began to recognize and distinguish the food places by their flags, which for some reason they displayed right outside the restaurant doors. A red flag with the crescent and the star appeared. I knew it was Turkish. We dipped down on some black iron narrow stairs into a basement. Both of us needed a good meal. I knew we would find some spicy soups, hot bread, and well-seasoned meats on rice there. I ordered for us both.
You know what I hate?
Chiesa asked as she separated her bread into smaller slices. I just looked up from my water glass, acknowledging her.
When somebody tries to stick their hand in something and change someone else's fate. You know, someone who tries to block natural things from happening. That's what Akemi's family is trying to do to you two. I'm on your side 100%. I put my heart and my life on that.
She dipped her bread into her spinach. Her words kicked me in my chest and played again in my mind.
I put my heart and my life on that.
Chiesa had just said.
You know, I used to like one boy named...
Don't tell me his name, I interrupted her.
Oh, sorry. Well, I liked him.
Why? I asked. She smiled.
I was going to tell you. I liked him because he could fight better than the other boys in our dojo. So when I realized that I liked him, I told Yuka.
Why did you tell her?
Because at the time, we were best friends. Besides, we had both sworn to one another that we didn't like boys. We agreed that they were all stupid and slow. We promised one another we wouldn't act ridiculous over the boys the way other girls did. But then I began to feel something right here.
She placed her hand over her left breast.
So I went to Yuka first and told her the truth and asked her, what did she think? She said it didn't matter as long as I didn't start acting dumb about the boy like the other girls do. So I was like, cool.
Then Chiesa suddenly stopped telling her story. We ate in silence, with only the sounds of our chewing and the fast-paced Turkish music playing in the background. So what did you do? I asked 5 minutes later.
I was waiting to see if you cared. I don't want to bore you with my silly story, when I already know your story is so deep and true and important.
She confessed, but there was no real reason for her to worry about boring me. Dinner is a time when I try to relax, especially my mind. What did you do about it? I asked her again.
I didn't do anything. Japanese girls wait for the guy to make the first gesture.
She said. Oh yeah? It didn't sound true to me. I pictured Akemi waiting for me on the side wall of my job in Chinatown, with her English-speaking cousin there to introduce us. I smiled at the memory. So did he make the first move? I asked her, because it seemed like she wanted to tell me.
Well, he chose me to be his sparring partner at one of the sessions. This was the first time he did that.
She said proudly. Did you two fight?
Yes, and I let him win. I could have beaten him.
I laughed naturally. I was thinking, how could she choose a guy because he was the best fighter in her dojo, but she could whip him? It meant she could defeat all the boys in her dojo. None of it was a good look for young samurais, but I didn't say shit.
Seriously? I could have.
She pushed. If he liked you, he wouldn't have fought you, I told her. Then I thought about what I had just said.
Japanese boys will fight girls. We spar one another often. They hit hard too. They're not the same as you.
She added swiftly. So after he beat you, what happened? I followed up.
Well, in our dojo, if you lose a fight, you have mop duty. So I have to stay after everyone else except the sensei had gone and mopped the whole floor. I was on my knees, drying it with a special cloth when he came back alone and actually helped me. We dried the floor together. I was so excited. Afterward, he gave me a ride on his bicycle to my grandfather's house. I didn't invite him in to come inside because my grandfather wasn't home. But I was still happy that at least he knew where I lived and it was so close to our dojo.
She paused, like she was seeing it all in her mind.
On White Day, all the girls were secretly giving guys who they liked chocolate.
She began again. White Day? I asked.
Yeah, it's like the American Valentine's Day. But here in Japan, the girls give chocolates to the guys.
She explained. I thought it sounded crazy. Girls giving men sweets instead of the other way around.
I didn't though. I thought it was corny. All the girls giving the same thing, so I made a gift for him instead and left it in his sneaker.
She paused. I just looked at her and waited.
It was a slingshot,
she said. I smiled. I thought it was a dope gift.
I left a note with it saying, after class, I can show you how to shoot it. Let me know if you want to.
The waiter arrived with our tea. He placed the small hot cups on a table. Chiesa held the tiny cup with both hands. Her nails were clipped and clean without polish.
I waited for him on the steps after dojo. He walked right out with his friends. I thought he didn't see me, but then he looked back. We just stared at each other for some seconds. He kept going with his friends. I was disappointed. As I walked home, I heard someone behind me, and I turned, and it was him. He had the slingshot in his hand and was smiling at me. So I walked toward him to show him how to shoot it. He said he already knows how.
Chiesa laughed as though she was laughing at him. I bet he didn't, was all I said.
You're right. He was setting up targets and snatching up rocks. He would shoot and miss. I tried not to laugh, but I did laugh just a little, so he challenged me. He said that I couldn't do it any better. Well, that was it. I forgot that I liked him. You know, Aunt Tasha says if you don't play dumb and let boys win and everything, they won't like you. But I wasn't thinking about that. I was just thinking about the challenge. So I told him if he didn't believe that I was better than him at it, he should run, and I would shoot him, and I wouldn't miss. Well, he ran. I let him get far away. I took aim, and the rock sped through the air like crazy and caught him on his calf, and he fell.
She laughed.
I ran over to help him. He didn't want any help. Just like Aunt Tasha taught me, he was angry. So he hopped home.
Chiesa said softly before looking up at me to check my reaction. I just started cracking up, a rare good laugh at the punk she had chosen. So she began laughing also.
I put a note in the sneaker like 3 days later. Sorry about the bruise. If you don't like me anymore, you can give me back the White Day gift and I will understand.
What happened? I followed up.
Waiting for a Japanese guy is like waiting for spring to come again during the summer season. So I asked Yuka what I should say to him or do. Yuka said, let's plan a Gokhan party.
Chiesa explained. Gokhan? I repeated. Does that have anything to do with the Japanese chess game? I asked, thinking that couldn't be a real way to hook up.
No, not the chess game. A Gokhan party or a Go party is when Japanese girls and guys all meet in a restaurant or place together, and everybody talks and laughs and shares eats and drinks. You know, like to take the pressure off of the real couples from being alone face to face with one another.
It sounded strange to me. Were the two people who liked each other afraid to be alone in the same public place? I could understand if they were trying to avoid being alone in a private place. Maybe they had some rule like the Muslims and wouldn't have sex before marriage. Therefore, they didn't trust themselves to be alone in a private space. Chiesa must have realized my confusion just by looking at my expression.
It is very difficult for Japanese people to express their true feelings to one another. There is a shyness that is shared and expected. For a Japanese girl to just come out and boldly say to a guy what she is feeling or wanting or thinking would be taken the wrong way,
she said as I listened intently.
So every 5 minutes, go means 5 in Japan. We just switch partners and talk and get to know the next person a bit more. The idea is that after the go party is over, every girl tells her best friend who she really likes, and the guys tell their male friends. Then the best friend makes the call, so the two who really like one another can meet up.
She was finished. Meet up alone? I asked.
Not necessarily, but maybe this time it's less of a group than before. But the girl and the guy who really like each other are definitely there, and the other friends are trying to help them to get together.
Okay, was all I said.
Well, Yuka set up the Gokhan party. When I got there was only Yuka, me, and him. And that's not how a go party is supposed to be. Then Yuka said to him, Chiesa likes you a lot. I felt embarrassed, but truthfully, I was excited too, and grateful to Yuka for saying what I had never really clearly said to him. Then Yuka said, I told Chiesa that you and I are dating already, but she insists that you should tell her that personally.
Chiesa frowned and leaned back, her chopsticks loosely held in her fingers. "What did the fool say?" I asked Chiesa, referring to the guy that they both liked.
He didn't even look at me. He turned the other way and said, "Yuka-san is right. Yuka is my girlfriend." So I just drank the glass of water that was in front of me and left.
Chiesa said.
Later, Yuka and all her friends, who just the day before had all been my friends too, gathered around me and watched while Yuka announced Chiesa is Konketsuji. They all laughed. Then Yuka shouted, "Hafu! Don't you know that Japanese boys will always choose a Japanese girl?"
"Did you fight her?" I asked her.
No. Yuka and I had promised one another that we would never, ever fight over boys, so I just walked away. I always keep my promises,
she said solemnly. I didn't know what Konketsuji or Hafu meant, yet Chiesa's pronunciation of the words and her tone and expression of disgust made the insult in them clear.
Half a person.
That's what Hafu means, and Kogetsuji means
Child of unlike things put together. For me, Yuka was saying that the part of me that is Japanese from my mother is human. That part of me that is from my African-American father is not.
Moments later, Chiesa said,
I realized I never loved that boy anyway. I just liked him and was a bit impressed. But I did love Yuka. Anytime I thought about what happened with her, I would be shocked all over again. I cried. My whole body hurt. It was difficult for me to accept that anyone could be so close to me, talking and laughing with me, sometimes sleeping over and us going out together, then could really have felt hatred for me all along. After a long time, I realized that Yuka did not even like the boy at all. She just didn't want me to like him. She was my best friend and didn't even want me to be happy.
That boy wasn't your fate, I assured her. If he was, he would have been with you even now, still. He was a coward. It sounds like he allowed Yuka to control him instead of being true to himself as a man. I paid for our meal, thanked the waiter, and tipped him. Chiesa opened the billfold, subtracted the tip, and laid it on my side of the table.
Japan is a no-tip country,
she said.
Even in a Turkish restaurant, Japanese laws are the same.
The completely booked Hyatt Hotel welcomed Chiesa and me as she checked in. We were escorted to a reserved room. I carried our belongings. She opened the door. There were 2 well-dressed beds with crisp white goose-down quilts and a white window that led to a lighted garden. The lamps were shaded with rice paper, and the drawings on the wall were beautiful displays of kanji as Asian art. The curtains were made of white linen. The floors were made of tatami. The bathroom was 2 steps up and enclosed by thick glass. The faucet and sink and toilet and shower stall were all glistening clean. The air smelled like a very subtle perfume, a clean scent, but not antiseptic. I wanted and needed to hear the important information that led Chiesa to travel all the way down here to help me locate my wife. But I already knew that right after I heard it and discussed it, I would be up and out of her hotel room for my own sake, for Chiesa's sake, and to keep true. Chiesa opened her backpack and pulled out a stack of books tied in size order.
These are the books written by Shiori Nakamura,
she said.
While I was in the bookstore, I read one of her poems. So powerful.
Then she pointed out that each book had been wrapped in a beautiful evergreen book cover with a gold seal that read, Kinokuniya, the name of the store. Thank you, I said, moving the stack over to my right and pulling out my pocket knife to cut the string. Just as I picked up one of the books, Chiesa said,
"They're all written in Japanese and none available in English."
"What about the author, Seth Arrington? Did you check him out?" I asked her.
Looking him up almost made me miss my train. I checked on the shelves first before asking customer service in the Japanese section on the first floor. They could not find anything or even pull up his name as an author. I thought maybe you or I had the name wrong. Then I went upstairs to the 7th floor, the English section. I checked the shelves again and nothing. When I went to the English customer service desk, they actually found his name and told me that the author had only written one book and that the one book he wrote, Never Surrender, was out of print and unavailable in Japan. She said that author had a really short career.
"Out of print?" I repeated.
She said that means that the book company is not printing any more copies of it. You would have to go to a used bookstore or something and see if you could find it,
she advised.
Oh, and the lady was like, "What do you need this book for? Is it a school assignment? Is it for you or someone else?" Can you believe her?
Chiesa stared into me for answers. "Was she Japanese?" I asked.
Of course. Everyone at the English section is Japanese. It's just called the English section because you can buy books written in English on that floor. And all of the other floors are books written strictly in Japanese.
Oh, and about Akemi's diary.
I have completed the list for you.
Chiesa said, and handed it to me.
In most cases, Akemi wrote about her friends and family, but she didn't list their addresses or even refer to their location. It's a diary, like a daily account of what was happening in her life from right before she left Japan to go and study in New York up until her art show in Manhattan. I believe she probably has a bunch of diaries stashed somewhere else that leads up to this one here.
She held up the diary.
It's not an address book, so I had to read carefully a couple of times and figure out who was who from where. Then I went to the library right after you caught the train earlier today and got the directory for Kyoto from the reference desk. I looked up each name that she mentioned in her writing in the Tokyo directory and then in the Kyoto directory. I know you only wanted the names and addresses and phone numbers of the people Akemi mentioned in the diary, as well as the names of the places she went to often in Kyoto. But I think you should listen to what her relationship is to certain people. She writes about all of them, and that will make it faster for us to locate her.
Chiesa said sincerely, and she had my full attention.
For example, she writes very affectionately about a woman named Mayu. I put her name on your list. Well, later on in her diary, when Akemi and her father had a conflict, Mayu took Akemi's side, although she pretended to support Mr. Nakamura because he is her employer. Anyway, at one point in the diary, I found Mayu's last name. It's Morita. Then I looked up Mayu Morita's phone number and her address here in Kyoto. Now Mayu works at Akemi's home 7 days a week from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. as the house manager. Since I know now Mayu-san's home address, I can go there at, say, 5 a.m. and follow her to work. I'll end up at Akemi's house. Simple.
Chiesa's stare was intense, and she waited for my reply to her detailed detective work. I smiled and said, "Sounds good, but you could have just given me Mayu's address over the telephone and let me check it out."
I could have, but you couldn't follow Mayu-san at 5 in the morning and go unnoticed. Mr. Nakamura and his men are already on the lookout for anyone fitting your description. Young, African, male. Probably Mr. Nakamura has no idea that you are even here in Kyoto. We should keep it that way,
she argued. It didn't take too many seconds for me to see her strategy emerging. Chiesa was right. I was already imagining that the Kyoto home would be different from the Roppongi home, where the security was lax. I expected this location to be Nakamura's estate, an expensive spread, completely secured and alarmed. Chiesa opened Akemi's diary to further express her point of view.
From the way Akemi tells her story in her diary, she has got about 4 different sets of friends. She doesn't mix them together because she said each set has their own mind and ideas and none of them want to be any different than they already are.
Are those her words? I asked Chiesa.
Exactly.
She answered.
So powerful, right? You know, near the end of her diary, on the corner of one page, she has scribbled, "They were flesh without nerves, veins without blood, bodies without heart, these Japanese men." It made my body shake. Her words. So true.
Chiesa said. I didn't say nothing, so Chiesa continued reporting.
There's one girl that Akemi is really extremely close with. She isn't part of any of the 4 sets, and when Akemi spends time with her, it's usually just the 2 of them. This girl is from Nepal. She's 2 years older than Akemi, and she attends Kyoto Seika University. I put her name on your list also. It's Josna, but Akemi calls her Jo. If everything else fails, based on the story Akemi writes about her life, if you find Jo, she'll lead you directly to Akemi. This girl named Josna knows all Akemi's secrets.
Secrets, I repeated, but not for an explanation or response. I had cataloged the 2 names in my mind permanently. Mayu Morita and Josna, a.k.a. Jo. Any last name for Josna? I asked while searching the list in my hand.
No, sorry, she didn't write it.
What about this person named Himawari? I asked, noticing that she was the 3rd person listed after Mayu and Josna.
She's Japanese and Akemi's friend. They have some kind of girls-only club that meets at a location nearby their school, but there's no exact address. From the way Akemi describes it, I don't know if it's a house or apartment or what. Akemi mentioned Himawari 6 or 7 times and the rest of the girls only briefly. Now, if we divide up the lists, we should definitely be able to locate Akemi tomorrow.
Chiesa said confidently.
I'll follow Mayu in the early morning. That might be it. But if not, I'll check the first 3 places and you can check the last 3 places.
She said, taking charge during the silence of my thoughts. Inshallah, I said, still trapped in my thoughts and measuring out my next moves.
What?
Chiesa asked. What? I responded.
Insha what?
She asked. It means God willing. If Allah wants us to be successful, we will be, I explained.
First you said God, then you said Allah. Which one is it?
Chiesa asked. Allah is God. Allah is Arabic for God in English, I explained. Sometimes English-speaking people get tight or scared or crazy when they hear Muslims say Allah.
Allah or God? The 2 words sound so different from one another.
Chiesa said.
Allah sounds softer and nicer.
She continued.
I'll say Allah because it sounds better to me.
She turned away from me, then turned around and looked back.
And you're right. My Aunt Tasha would probably faint if she heard me say Allah. She goes to church every Sunday, and when I visit her in New York, I have to go too.
Chiesa smiled. There's only one God, so Aunt Tasha could chill, I told her. Then I got up to leave.
Are you leaving?
Chiesa asked. I have to, I said.
There are 2 beds.
Chiesa pointed out. Yeah, 2 beds and 1 room, I told her.
They have breakfast downstairs beginning at sunrise. We're on the same block as Akemi's high school. I checked it all out on the map. This is a strategic location,
she said. I'll meet you downstairs for breakfast at 5 a.m., I responded. Then we'll head out. I'll take the high school and the first 3 places on the list. You take Mayu's home and the last 3 places on the list. Let's meet back here afterward and compare notes. Hopefully Akemi will be with me when I get back here. I meant it.
Here, you need to show this key at breakfast.
Chiesa handed it to me. Do you have one for yourself? I asked.
Hi.
She smiled. I left. I I had seen the small Holy Quran in Kieza's backpack pocket. I'm sure she had just bought it from the bookstore today. I liked that she didn't pull it out and show it to me like it was some kind of prop to win points. I believed that she bought it out of a real curiosity and with a true intention. Outside the Hyatt, as I descended the hill, the thought dropped into my mind. I know now what Kiesa switched. She had straightened out her hair. It appeared much thinner and longer now. It gave her a different look. Her new look was nice. Her old look was very nice too. After breakfast in the Hyatt dining area, a light meal and 8 glasses of water, I wouldn't let her drink any fruit juice. The natural sugar would just make you more thirsty and hungry, I explained to her. Chiesa left and moved into action. I used my hotel key to access a room alone. Stripped down to my boxers and t-shirt, which I still wore from the night before. I unpacked my clippers from their heavy packaging. The bathroom mirror, which was divided into thirds, was perfect. I pulled up the left and right sides of the mirror so I could see the sides and back of my own head. I mapped out my plan in my mind. I switched the clippers on. When I heard them buzzing, I got busy, slowly, without anyone or anything to disturb me and a do not disturb sign on the door. My hands were steady for my first real attempt at barbering my own head. When I felt good about the job I had done, I had checked my head out thoroughly. I switched them off and used the edger to make my cut look professional. I eased out of my t-shirt with the coils of hair clinging everywhere. I balled it up and tossed it in the miniature garbage can. I checked out my shoulder. Ever since Akemi licked my wound, it had healed and disappeared. It was easy for me to believe that her saliva was salve. Maybe because I wanted to. Thinking about her got me distracted. When I refocused, it sped me up. I wanted to get to the schoolyard before the students arrived so I could search each one as they climbed up, my eyes looking for only my wife. After a high-powered, soothing shower, I cracked open a new pair of Fruit of the Looms, a new pair of kicks, some blue Jabot cargos, and a deep blue polo shirt. I changed my mind and pulled all that shit away and chose something better. Also, all fresh and crispy. I picked up my mess and then reached for my camera to use as a prop. Within seconds, I realized that Chiesa had already taken it. In fact, it seemed like it had been hers since I first arrived in Tokyo. My binoculars would have to do. I dropped them around my neck and checked to make sure I had my shades. I turned off the digital do not disturb sign and turned on the make up the room sign. In the hotel lobby, I grabbed the free newspaper, folded it over, and wore it in my back pocket. Outside, the parade of felines was about to jump off. I hurried up the 3 or 4 hills and posted at the top. On purpose, I behaved like a tourist. Through my binoculars, I scanned faces, focusing on this one and that one and refocusing on all the rest. After a while, I flipped my aim down toward arriving shoes. It might sound crazy, but it would be faster and easier to identify her by her footwear. However, I kept coming up with penny loafers, mediocre pumps, flat and high-heeled sandals, as well as Converses and New Balances. My wife wasn't in the mix. Soon the gates of the high school were drawn open to allow the students to enter. I posted on the side of the wall and watched the females who were streaming in from the Princess Line buses. An hour later, when the guards closed the iron gates, I moved. I walked around the perimeter of the high school, toward the sides and the back where I had not gone before. There were sports fields of every kind behind the black iron fence of spears. On the back side there was a basketball court. On my left there was another full basketball court. This one was not locked behind an iron fence. It was wide open. So in my mind, it had to be part of the Kyoto Women's College where everything was unlocked and accessible and females flowed in and out. I stood still, thinking. It was hard to believe how expertly the Japanese mind their business. In Brooklyn, I spent many hours considering how to move around uninterrupted by unwelcome Souljah who jocked and harassed. Here, it was the opposite. Each person is ignored so well, it's bordering on insult. As I searched for my wife in the early morning sun that had just begun its slow boil, no one greeted me. No cop asked me, "What are you doing here?" No teacher or professor said, "May I help you?" No student questioned,
"Are you looking for someone here at the all-girls school?"
No one offered to give me directions or show me around. I didn't run up on anyone, African, American, Latino, Indian, or even European. They were uniformly Japanese. As I descended the hills, when I entered any of the small places of business, no one trembled or jerked. No attendant followed me up and down the aisles. It was as though I was free and safe and invisible. It felt extremely peculiar to me. I began thinking, how could I break the ice and get even one of these Japanese worker dudes to loosen up and look me in the eye and start spilling his guts so I could collect some clues, figure out how they run ish out here in Kyoto. Even though I was a foreigner to them and they were all foreigners to me, I figured there had to be something common among them besides women. A more neutral thing that could get the conversation started and keep the tempers of men from flaring. A plan was formulating in my mind. At noon, I returned to the schoolyard right between the high school and the college in my sweats and my Brooklyn t-shirt with a basketball in my hand. I walked up on the guys who posted up on the rocks during their lunch break. I pushed my ball into one of them, right in his chest, and said, "Konnichiwa, play ball." He looked startled at first, then a smile came through. He turned to his friends who were slow to pick up. I walked away, and he began to follow me. They began to follow him. I didn't look back, but I knew they were still behind me because 2 of the 5 of them were smoking. On the court, I went right into it, getting the feel of the court and the non-regulation basket. Intentionally, I showed them my skills. They stood on the sideline watching like girls. I walked up to the original one and pushed the ball to him. Then I picked 2 of his guys for my team and gestured 2 of his guys to go to his side. I flagged the extra kid who was smoking a next cigarette, letting him know to move off the court and out of our way. Using all hand motions, I checked the ball and we began to play. We were off to a slow start. Once the adrenaline started pumping, they would become more comfortable and the pace would pick up. In 3 minutes, a couple of females got drawn to us and stood watching. The guy had tapped originally got pumped at their arrival. 2 minutes later, he was out of his shirt. I went easy on them, letting them showcase their rudimentary performance. They played ball like they were keeping count of each step and move they made. It seemed like someone had taught them specific plays and moves, and they thought they needed to stick to them like dance steps. More girls collected. They weren't rowdy, though. They whispered to each other and watched with intense gazes. 2 girls sat and opened their bento boxes and ate with their wooden chopsticks. 20 minutes in, one of the players on the other team threw up the timeout signal and ran to the side, lifting the water bottle out of the girl's hand and drinking some. Now, I knew that he knew her good. By the time Game 1 finished, there were 12 girls gathered around the 6 of us men and the 7th one seated on the sideline chain-smoking. I threw up 2 fingers so we could run the second game. A player from the other side threw up the X symbol, so I knew he had to leave. I motioned to the smoker, and he jumped up and replaced him. 6 dudes in a circle organizing a game, but now the girls have formed a circle outside our circle, like they were part of it. The original Japanese guy I chose to get the game started said to me in English, "Name?" I answered, "Mayonaka." A girl from the outside circle repeated,
Mayonaka?
It was in the form of a question. "Hi, Mayonaka," I said confidently. I asked her, "Name?" The 2 circles became one as they all gasped at my use of one short Japanese sentence.
Raiko,
She answered, telling me her name. That set it off, and each person in our male-female circle announced their name. As I watched them become a bit more easy with each other, I'm thinking, that's right, I got my own Gokon party going on. These Japanese dudes seem grateful. I figured they might have sat on those rocks reading manga and checking out some comic strip chicks with abnormally large tits and smoking for years without getting up the heart to approach one of these females before she graduated. In 15 minutes, that had all changed.
Brooklyn?
One girl mispronounced it as she read my t-shirt in the form of a question. New York, I responded, knowing that they would be more familiar.
New York!
3 of the girls gasped, 1 clapped, and said,
I like New York!
They all giggled. Then the original Japanese guy, who I now know was named Udo, pointed to my kicks. I like, he said. Yeah, I acknowledged, not used to any male talking about how he liked something I was wearing. Michael Jordan? Udo added. Hi, you know it, I said. He was admiring my Nikes, Jordan's black ones. I understood. These joints were famous. Young Michael Jordan had come into the league last year and switched up the game with the all-black sneaker. The league was charging him a $5,000 violation fee per night just to rock these joints, and he was rocking them anyway. That's why I call these my 5,000s. Udo was now placing his foot beside my foot, saying, Big! Referring to mine. I didn't correct him. His feet were tiny, but why point it out? I was wearing an American size 10 men's, not big for my 6'1" height. I stepped back and bounced the ball to get the second game started. The girls dropped back into the background. My team won the second game also. It was easy, since all 6 of the Japanese guys were basically watching me hoop. When we finished, I gave Udo the extra Brooklyn t-shirt I had stuck in the fence for bargaining. I gave Yoshi my fitted and asked him to call the girl who gave him the water over here. When he came back with her, I asked him, Himawari-san, wa doko ni amasuka? Which means, where's Himawari? Yoshi and the girl both looked at one another first. Then the girl repeated,
Himawari-san?
"Hi," I confirmed. "Tomodachi," I said, meaning friend.
Wakamarimashita.
She said, meaning that she understood. Yoshi, the guy, and Raiko, the girl, began speaking Japanese to one another for what seemed like a long time. Yoshi then turned to me and said, "Sanji ni," which means at 3 o'clock. "Doko ni?" I asked, meaning where. He flagged me to follow. We all walked back to the rocks that divided the high school from the college. "Koko ni," Yoshi said, meaning right here. "Hanigatsu gozaimasu," I said coolly. Inside, I was excited. After the girls left, I walked down the hill with Yoshi and Udo. Udo worked in a nearby noodle shop. Surprisingly, Yoshi worked at the laundry station on the back lot of the Hyatt Hotel. Both of them asked before going back into their work.
Ashita?
They wanted to play ball tomorrow. All I could say was maybe. I didn't know if maybe was one of the few English words that they would understand or not. I stepped inside the Hyatt lobby to cool down. I was thirsty. My non-Ramadan behavior was delivering my punishment rapidly, but I will not break. After chilling in the plush seating in the lobby and lowering my body temperature, I checked for Chiesa. Her hotel room was clean now and as good as new. On hotel stationery on her desk, she left a note.
Ryoshi, I have all the info. I'll meet you back here at sunset. Wait for me. We'll eat and drink together, okay?
On the top of my list of places where my wife might be wondering was the bamboo forest. It was back at Arashiyama. I didn't think I could get over there and through the forest in time to get back to the 3 o'clock meetup with Himawari. So I shifted my strategy and bet on my 3 o'clock appointment instead. Besides, I knew that word was traveling now that I was on campus. I needed that to happen to counteract the girl with the pink pumps or Iowa Akita telling my wife that I flew home to New York defeated so that she could help me to, quote, forget, unquote, me. My objective was to let enough students notice me so that if my wife was actually here in Kyoto, it would be impossible for her not to catch word. Further, after thinking about it real hard, I had decided that even though the Japanese wore a game face of uninvolved, unemotional disinterest, they had to be, like most human beings, both nosy and curious. I showered and cleaned up again to cool down some more. After the Azure player I left, I was out of wearing all black for now. Chilling in Calvin Klein, the white linen fabrics were repelling the sun instead of swallowing it the way my black clothes did. My white-on-white kicks were moving me smoothly uphill. I felt only a piece of regret about dropping Himawari's name at the basketball game when I did not actually know her. The fact was, I would never drop my wife's name out there in the mixed crowd of males and females in public. I knew that wasn't cool, and I knew that there was a chance that Himawari might not show up because of the curiosity or damage it might create around her reputation as a young woman. I had already prepared myself for the possibility that at 3 o'clock, I might end up standing by myself. I know, stopping mid-story sucks, but I only pause because I need to take a breather before I catch a fever. I would like, or rather love, to thank you, fellow queens and kings, for tuning in to Ralph Reads on TURN, the United Ronin Networks. If you would like to leave a small donation or would like to connect to me on social media, please do so via www.solo.to/RGMC2407. And don't forget to tell a friend to tune in to TURN, the United Ronin Networks. We are Ronin. Fellow royalty, pick up a good book, read a good story, and set your good self free. I appreciate you, and I love you like cooked food. I will see you fellow queens and kings on the next edition of this Sister Souljah miniseries on Ralph Reads.